Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, we follow a path, not across open water, not through distant lands, but inward, into something more contained, more complex, a structure designed not to guide, but to confuse. This is the story of Theseus. But like many stories, it does not begin at the center. It begins before the path is visible, before the destination is known, in a place that feels separate, removed from what will come. Theseus is not raised as a prince, not openly, not with recognition. His identity is not hidden completely, but it is not revealed either. His mother, Aethra, knows who he is, knows what he will become, but does not tell him, not immediately, because some knowledge is not given early, it is discovered. There is a stone placed, not randomly, but with intention, and beneath it, objects, a sword, and sandals, and this is the condition. When he is strong enough to lift the stone, he will know, and this moment does not come suddenly. It arrives gradually as strength builds, as time passes, as something within him begins to form. And when it happens, it is not dramatic, not announced. He lifts it, not with struggle, but with readiness. And in that moment, his path changes. And in that moment, as the stone is lifted, as the objects beneath it are revealed, there is no immediate understanding, not complete, not all at once, because knowing does not always arrive in a single moment. It unfolds piece by piece. The sword, not newly placed, but waiting. The sandals, not decorative, but purposeful. And Aethra, seeing that the moment has come, speaks, not quickly, not with urgency, but with care, because what she tells him will not change again. His father is Aegeus, king of Athens, and the objects beneath the stone were left for him, not as a gift, but as proof. And now the path is clear. He must go, not remain, not continue the life he has known, but leave it. And this is where the story begins to stretch, because leaving is not a single act. It is a process. There are two paths to Athens. One, by sea, direct, safer. The other, by land, longer, uncertain, filled with places that are not empty. And Theseus does not choose the easier path, not out of necessity, but by decision. He chooses the road, and this choice defines everything that follows, because the road is not simply distance, it is interruption. It does not allow passage without resistance. And as he begins, the land changes gradually from what he has known to something less defined. The path is not smooth, not structured. It bends, shifts, disappears, and returns. And this is where time begins to stretch, because movement forward is no longer continuous. It is broken into moments, encounters, delays. The first does not appear as a creature, but as a man, Periphetes, standing, not hidden, but present, at a point where the road narrows, holding a weapon, not refined, but heavy, a club. And this moment is not introduced. It simply exists. Periphetes does not speak much. He does not negotiate. He acts. And Theseus does not retreat, because from the beginning, the path he has chosen does not allow retreat. The encounter is direct, close, without distance, and it ends as quickly as it begins. But what remains is important, because Theseus does not leave the club behind. He takes it, not as a trophy, but as something that now becomes part of him. And this pattern begins. Each encounter leaves something behind, and he continues. The road stretches again, not empty, but quiet for a time until the next interruption. Cynes, a figure who does not attack directly, but differently. He bends trees, pulls them down, and uses their force to destroy those who pass. And this moment requires something else, not strength alone, but observation, because to face something like this is not to meet it head on. It is to understand it. And Theseus watches, learns, adapts, and when he acts, he does not invent something new. He reflects it, using the same method, the same structure. And this is where the pattern deepens, because Theseus does not only defeat, he mirrors, and the road continues. Time passes, not marked, but felt. The land shifts again, closer now, but not yet near, and another figure appears, Siren, at the edge of a cliff, where the path narrows again. And here, the danger is not immediate force, but position, because one misstep, one shift is enough. And again, Theseus does not rush. He watches, understands, waits, and when the moment comes, he acts, not quickly, but decisively, and the path clears, and this continues again and again. Each encounter different but connected, not random, but part of the road itself. And by the time he reaches Athens, he is not the same, not because of what he has gained, but because of what he has moved through. And this matters, because what waits in Athens is not simple. It is not arrival. It is another beginning, because the city is not at peace. There is something already in motion, something that does not end. The tribute to Crete. And this is where the story turns. And as Theseus continues along the road toward Athens, what becomes clear is that the journey itself is not simply a path between two places, but something that shapes him in ways that are not immediately visible. Each encounter he faces is not isolated, not separate from the others, but part of a larger pattern that gradually removes the version of himself that existed before he began. The road does not test him all at once. It does not present a single, overwhelming challenge that defines the journey. Instead, it introduces difficulty in fragments, one moment at a time, allowing each encounter to settle before the next appears. And this is what makes it different from sudden conflict, because there is no clear beginning or end to what he is moving through. There is only continuation. There are stretches where nothing happens, where the path extends quietly ahead, where the absence of challenge feels almost unfamiliar after what he has already faced. And in those moments, something else occurs, not externally, but internally. The mind begins to anticipate what is coming next. The body remains prepared, even when there is nothing to respond to. And this anticipation becomes part of the journey itself, a quiet tension that exists even in stillness. And this is where the road does something subtle but important. It teaches him to move without certainty, to continue without knowing when the next interruption will come or what form it will take. Because unlike the sea, which carries you forward, or a city which contains you, the road offers neither guidance nor structure. It only offers direction, and even that must be maintained through effort. And as Theseus enters Athens, there is no immediate recognition, no moment where everything becomes clear, because arrival does not always bring understanding. The city, though structured, though established, does not feel at ease. There is movement. There are people. There is life. But beneath it, there is something else, a quiet tension, not spoken openly, not displayed, but present. And Theseus, walking through the streets, does not yet know what he is stepping into, because the city is already part of something larger, something that extends beyond its walls. There is a pattern here, one that repeats at regular intervals. A selection, young men and young women, chosen not by desire, not by choice, but by obligation, sent away, not for war, not for alliance, but for something else. And this is where the story begins to slow, because understanding this system requires time. Athens does not act freely. It is bound to Crete, to King Minos, and this bond was not formed through peace. It was formed through consequence. There had been a death, a son of Minos, and Athens had been held responsible. And what followed was not negotiation. It was punishment, a demand, repeated every cycle. 7 youths, 7 maidens, sent to Crete, not to live, but to be lost. And this is what the city carries, not visibly, but constantly, because each cycle returns, and each time the same pattern unfolds. Families waiting, hoping, fearing, and Theseus, now within the city, begins to understand, not all at once, but piece by piece. He hears it in conversation, in hesitation, in the way people pause before speaking. And this is where the moment deepens, because now the story is no longer about the road, it is about something contained, something that repeats, and Theseus does not remain separate from it, because when the time comes, when the next tribute is chosen, he steps forward, not asked, not selected. He chooses, and this decision is different from the others, because those before him were sent. He goes, and this changes the meaning of the act, because now the pattern is interrupted, not completely, but enough. And this is where Aegeus appears, not as a distant king, but as a father. And this moment does not move quickly, because recognition does not remove fear. He sees Theseus, knows who he is, understands what he is choosing, and yet cannot stop it, because the system is larger than both of them. And this creates something quiet but powerful, because now the journey to Crete is not only a task, it is personal. And as the ship departs, the city does not celebrate, it watches, because it has seen this before, many times, and it has always ended the same way. The sea stretches between Athens and Crete, not violently, not unpredictably, but steadily. And this time, the journey feels different, not because the destination has changed, but because intention has. And when they arrive, Crete is not chaotic, not disordered. It is structured, controlled, ruled, and Minos does not appear immediately, He is not rushed because everything here moves according to order. And when Theseus is brought before him, there is no immediate judgment, only observation, because Minos has seen many come before, and he does not expect this one to be different. And yet, something about Theseus holds not strength, not defiance, but something quieter, certainty. And this is noticed, not acted on, but registered. And this is where another figure enters, Ariadne, not part of the tribute, not part of the system, but within it. And she sees him, not as the others have been seen, but differently, because something about him does not align with what has always happened. And this is where the story slows further, because this is not immediate connection. It is gradual, observed, felt, understood. She watches. He remains. And between them, something begins, not spoken openly, but forming. And in time, it becomes clear that what is about to happen does not have to follow the same path. And this is where the decision forms, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. A thread, a simple object, not powerful, not complex, but enough, because the labyrinth is not defeated by strength. It is navigated. And this is the key. And when the time comes, there is no announcement, no signal, no moment where everything pauses. It happens quietly. Theseus is led, not with force, but with certainty. The entrance to the labyrinth is not hidden, and yet it does not reveal itself fully. It sits low, wide, carved into the earth, not decorative, not symbolic, functional, a structure built, not to impress, but to contain. And as he stands before it, there is no movement from within, no sound, no indication of what lies inside. And this is what makes it different, because the danger is not visible, it is implied. And this slows everything, because when something cannot be seen, it must be imagined, and imagination extends time. He holds the thread given to him, simple, light, easily broken, and yet it is the only thing that connects him to the outside. He ties it, not quickly, not carelessly, but deliberately, to the entrance. And this moment, though small, is precise, because once he steps inside, there is no return without it. And then he enters. The air changes. Immediately cooler, still. The light begins to fall away, not suddenly, but gradually. Each step less visible than the last, and the space does not open. It narrows. The walls close, not tightly, but enough to remove the sense of openness, and the path does not continue straight. It turns again and again and again, not in a pattern that can be followed, but in a sequence that cannot be remembered. And this is the labyrinth, not a place that traps you immediately, but one that removes your sense of direction slowly, because as Theseus moves, he begins to notice that what he has passed does not feel distinct. One turn feels like the last. One corridor feels like another. And this creates something, a subtle uncertainty, not panic, not yet, but the beginning of disorientation. He continues, the thread unwinding behind him, a thin line connecting him to what is no longer visible. And this becomes important because the deeper he moves, the less the entrance exists, not physically, but in awareness. It is no longer something he can imagine clearly, only something he knows. And this difference matters because knowing is weaker than seeing. Time passes, not measured, not counted, only felt through movement, through repetition, through the quiet. And the quiet is complete No wind, no voice, no movement, only footsteps, and even those begin to soften as the ground changes, stone to dust, to something less defined. And this slows him further, because now even movement requires attention, and still nothing appears. No creature, no sound, only the structure itself. And this is where the labyrinth reveals its purpose, because it is not built to hold something. It is built to dissolve you, your sense of direction, your sense of time, your sense of where you are. All of it begins to weaken, and this is where most would stop, not because they are blocked, but because they no longer know which way is forward. But Theseus does not stop, not because he is certain, but because he continues. And this is the difference. He moves, not quickly, not confidently, but steadily, and the thread remains a constant in something that offers none. And deeper still, the air shifts, not dramatically, but enough. A weight, a presence, something that had not been there before. And this is where everything slows even further, because now he is no longer alone, not visibly, but undeniably. There is something ahead, not moving, not approaching, but waiting. And this changes the space, because now every step carries something with it, not fear, but awareness. And as he continues, the labyrinth feels different, not because it has changed, but because he has. And somewhere within it, the Minotaur exists. And before Theseus enters the labyrinth, before the first step is taken into the structure that cannot be understood from the outside, there is a moment that often seems small, almost insignificant when compared to what follows. The thread given to him by Ariadne appears simple, almost fragile, something that could easily be overlooked in a story defined by strength and confrontation. And yet, it is this object that carries the greatest weight, because The labyrinth is not something that can be defeated through force alone. It is not something that yields to strength, or to speed, or to determination in the way that other obstacles do. It is something that removes direction itself, something that dissolves the ability to distinguish one path from another, until movement becomes circular, until progress becomes indistinguishable from repetition. And within something like that, strength becomes irrelevant. What matters instead is connection. The thread does not guide him forward. It does not show him where to go. It does something much simpler and much more important. It preserves where he has been. It creates a link between what is known and what is not, allowing him to move into uncertainty without losing the ability to return. And this is what makes it essential, because entering the labyrinth is not the challenge. Returning is. And as Theseus continues deeper into the labyrinth, the space around him no longer feels like a structure that can be understood through movement alone. It becomes something else entirely, something that cannot be mapped in the way ordinary places can be mapped, because each turn does not simply lead to another, but seems to dissolve the memory of the last. The walls do not shift, and yet they feel as though they do, not physically, but perceptually, as if the act of moving forward erases what has already been seen, leaving only the present step and the uncertainty of the next. The thread remains in his hand, and though it is light, almost insignificant, it carries a weight that the labyrinth itself cannot remove. It is the only constant, the only line that does not change as everything else begins to lose distinction. And because of that, he does not rush. He does not attempt to force the path into something clearer than it is. Instead, he allows himself to move within it slowly, accepting that clarity will not come from seeing more, but from continuing despite seeing less. The deeper he moves, the more the labyrinth ceases to feel like a place designed for containment alone. It begins to feel intentional in a different way, not simply as a prison, but as a test of perception itself. There are stretches of corridor that feel longer than they should be, not because they extend further, but because nothing within them changes. The same stone, the same texture, the same absence of sound, repeated over and over again until time itself feels stretched, until each step becomes indistinguishable from the last. And then, gradually, something shifts. Not a sound at first, not a movement that can be clearly identified, but a presence that was not there before. It does not approach, and it does not retreat. It exists ahead, somewhere within the structure, and the awareness of it settles slowly into the space, altering it without altering anything visible. The air feels heavier, not in a way that restricts movement, but in a way that changes attention. Each step becomes more deliberate, not out of fear, but out of recognition that something has changed, even if that change cannot yet be fully seen. Theseus pauses, not because he is uncertain of what to do, but because movement without awareness is no longer possible. He listens, but there is no clear sound. He looks, but there is no immediate form. And yet the presence remains, undeniable now. No longer something subtle, but something that defines the space ahead. he continues. The thread unwinds behind him, marking each step in a way that the labyrinth cannot erase. And as he moves forward, the structure begins to feel less like a maze of turns and more like a narrowing path towards something central. Not physically narrower, but conceptually, as though the randomness of the earlier passages is giving way to something more focused, more contained, more intentional. And then, finally, it becomes visible. Not all at once, not in a sudden reveal, but in fragments. A movement that is too large to belong to the space it occupies. A shadow that does not align with the angles of the walls. A presence that is not defined by shape alone, but by the way it fills the space around it. The Minotaur. It does not rush forward. It does not react immediately to Theseus's presence. It stands or moves slowly within its own awareness, as though the labyrinth itself has removed the need for urgency. It does not hunt in the way that creatures outside would hunt, because nothing here escapes. Nothing here moves beyond its reach. Time within the labyrinth belongs to it. And this changes the nature of the encounter. Because this is not a moment of sudden violence. It is a moment of recognition. Theseus sees it clearly now. The size, the strength, the form that is both human and not. A merging that does not resolve into something familiar. And yet, even here, even in this moment, he does not act immediately. Because what stands before him is not simply something to be overcome. It is the center of the labyrinth, the reason for its existence, the presence around which everything else has been built. And to rush this moment would be to misunderstand it. So he waits. Not long, but long enough to see how it moves, how it occupies the space, how it turns, how it breathes. And in that observation, something becomes clear. Not a weakness, not an opening in the traditional sense, but a rhythm. A way in which the Minotaur exists within the labyrinth, bound to it in a way that shapes its movement. And then, the moment shifts. The Minotaur recognizes him. Not as something new, not as something unexpected, but as something that has finally arrived. And the movement that follows is not chaotic. It is direct. It closes distance not with hesitation, but with certainty. Because within the labyrinth, there is no need to chase. Everything that enters eventually arrives. Theseus moves, not backward, but to the side, not escaping the space, but adjusting within it. The first exchange is not decisive. It is testing. Force meets movement, movement meets force, and neither resolves immediately. The space is too confined for distance, too structured for randomness, and so the struggle becomes close, immediate, continuous. There is no clean separation between moments, no pause where one can fully reset. Each movement flows into the next, each adjustment shaping what follows. The Minotaur does not tire quickly, and Theseus does not attempt to overpower it in a single act. Instead, the encounter stretches, not because it cannot end, but because it must unfold. And within that unfolding, something becomes clear. This is not about a single strike. It is about endurance within proximity, remaining present within something that does not allow distance. And slowly, through continued movement, through adaptation, through the refusal to be overwhelmed by the closeness of it, the balance begins to shift. Not suddenly, gradually. The Minotaur's movement, once absolute, begins to lose precision. Its certainty does not disappear, but it changes. And Theseus, maintaining focus, maintaining awareness, begins to guide the encounter rather than react to it. And when the final moment comes, it does not feel like a break from what came before. It feels like the natural conclusion of everything that has already occurred. Not a sudden victory, but the result of sustained presence within the struggle. The Minotaur falls, and the labyrinth does not change. There is no sound that marks the end, no shift in the walls, no release in the air. The structure remains exactly as it was, because the labyrinth was never dependent on the creature within it. It was built to function regardless. And this is where the final challenge begins. Because defeating the Minotaur does not create a path out. It only removes one element of what was already there. Theseus stands, not in triumph, but in stillness, because what comes next requires something different. Not strength, not confrontation, but memory. He reaches for the thread, still there, still unbroken. And now, for the first time, it becomes the guide rather than the connection. He begins to follow it, not quickly, not with urgency, but with the same steadiness that brought him here. Because leaving the labyrinth is not easier than entering it. It is simply reversed. And as he moves, something interesting happens. The labyrinth does not feel the same, not because it has changed, but because he has. The turns that once felt indistinguishable now carry slight differences. The path that once dissolved into uncertainty now holds just enough familiarity to be followed. The thread, simple as it is, transforms the space from something infinite into something navigable. And this is what allows him to leave. Not force, not destruction, but connection. And eventually, after time that cannot be measured in the usual way, the light returns, faint at first, then clearer, until the entrance appears once more, not as something distant, but as something real. And he steps out, not as the same person who entered, but not entirely different either. Changed not by what he has defeated, but by what he has moved through. And this is the labyrinth. Not simply a place that traps, but a structure that reveals. And as Theseus moves deeper into the labyrinth, something begins to happen that is not immediately obvious, not something that can be seen or measured directly, but something that alters the experience of movement itself. Time begins to change, not in a sense that it stops or speeds up, but in the way it is felt, without variation in light, without external markers, without anything that signals progression. Time becomes something that is no longer tied to events, but to perception. A stretch of corridor that lasts only a few moments can feel extended, while longer periods pass without recognition. And this creates a kind of disorientation that is not based on fear, but on absence. the absence of change, the absence of variation, the absence of anything that distinguishes one moment from another. And within that absence, something happens to memory. The last turn becomes less clear. The path just taken begins to dissolve, not completely, but enough that it cannot be relied upon. And this forces him to remain entirely within the present moment, because the past no longer offers guidance, and the future cannot be predicted. And as Theseus steps out of the labyrinth, there is no immediate sense of completion, because leaving a place like that does not instantly restore what was lost inside it. The open air, the space beyond the walls, the presence of light, all of it returns, but not all at once. Not in a way that feels immediate, because the mind does not move as quickly as the body. And for a time, even outside, the structure of the labyrinth remains, not physically, but in perception. He stands, not in triumph, but in stillness, allowing the world to return gradually. The thread, still in his hand, now no longer needed, but not yet released, because it has carried him through something that cannot be easily understood. And this is where the story shifts again, because the labyrinth was not the end. It was only the center. What follows is return, and return is not simple. Ariadne waits, not far from the entrance, but not close enough to see what has happened within, because what happens inside the labyrinth does not reveal itself outward. She does not know. When the moment has ended, only that it must. And time, for her, moves differently, not through action, but through waiting, through uncertainty, through the possibility that what has always happened will happen again. And this is its own kind of stillness, because waiting without knowing extends time in a way that movement does not. And when Theseus appears, there is no immediate reaction, because recognition takes a moment, not because he is unclear, but because what she expected was absence, and presence must be understood. And when it is, the moment does not rush forward, it settles, because what has changed is not only the outcome, but the pattern, the cycle that has repeated without interruption. has now been broken, and this carries weight, not loudly, but deeply. They leave Crete, not with celebration, but with quiet movement, because departure does not erase what came before. The sea once again becomes the space between, but this time the journey is different. Not because the distance has changed, but because the direction has. And yet, even here, the story does not resolve cleanly, because Ariadne, who made the return possible, does not complete the journey. There is an island, Naxos, and it is here that something shifts again. Not dramatically, not through conflict, but through decision. Ariadne is left behind, and this moment is often told quickly, but it should not be, because what it represents is not simple. She who made the path out possible does not continue forward. And this introduces something else, that not all roles continue, even when they are essential, and Theseus moves on, not because it is easy, but because movement has become what defines him, and the journey continues toward Athens, toward the place where everything began. But even now, the return is not complete, because something remains. The sails, black, a signal, agreed upon before departure. If he returned, he was to change them to white, a sign of success, of life. And yet, in the continuation of everything that has happened, this is forgotten, not intentionally, not as a choice, but as something lost in the movement forward. And as the ship approaches, Aegeus waits, watching the horizon, looking for the signal. And when he sees the sails unchanged, he does not wait for certainty. He acts, and the story closes, not with return alone, but with consequence, because even success does not arrive without cost. And this is the story of Theseus, not a story of defeating something, but of moving through something, of entering without understanding and leaving not unchanged, but not entirely defined by what was faced. And this is the labyrinth, not only a place, but a pattern, one that exists, not only in stone, but in experience.